My name is Emily Prudhomme. I'm an assistant professor of computer science at Boston College, and today I'll be talking about our work on distinctive features of pragmatic expression in adults with ASD. Much of this work was carried out by my two undergraduate students, Christine Yang and Dora Liu, in collaboration with colleagues from the University of Rochester and Upstate Medical University, including Allison Canfield, Christine Hopkins, Jill Aldrich, Sarah Farash, and Laura Silverman. Adults with autism spectrum disorder face many difficulties in their communication related to pragmatic expression, which can cause problems in other areas of their life, including finding employment, establishing relationships, and achieving independence. There's been a lot of work on pragmatic expression in the discourse of children with ASD, but it is very understudied in adults. And the focus of our project is on collaborative discourse in particular. That is the kind of conversations people have when they're working together to solve a problem, because we feel like this is particularly important for adults with autism as they're trying to find jobs and make friends. Our objectives are to find distinctive pragmatic features of ASD in adults, and also to look at how neurotypical interlocutors adapt their own pragmatic expression when they're speaking to adults with ASD. We focus on three features: politeness, informativeness, and uncertainty. And we compare the expression of these features in experimental participants with and without ASD, and then also in their neurotypical conversational partners as they're speaking to experimental participants with or without ASD. The eligibility criteria for participants with ASD was that they had to meet a criteria on the ADOS. And then for all participants, the requirements were a PIQ and VIQ of over 80, age over 18 years, no history of any kind of speech, language, or hearing difficulty, and monolingual American English speaker. These last two are to ensure that any differences we find are related to ASD and not to a language background or a language problem. We have three groups. We have the participants with typical development. There were 8. We have the participants with ASD. There were 14. And then we have the conversational partners. All of the conversational partners were typically developing, and there were 11 of them. Some conversational partners interacted with more than one experimental participant. There are no significant differences in PIQ or age, and the experimental participants, the conversational partners, did not have the full assessment, but they were screened to make sure that they did not have ASD. The task we used to elicit the discourse was a collaborative map task, in which the two people having the conversation are each given a map. The maps are slightly different with different obstacles, different labels and landmarks, and the experimental participant has to explain to the conversational partner how to get to where he or she is on the map. The conversations were recorded and transcribed, and we ended up with these numbers of utterances. The ASD group had about 1,700 utterances. The TD group had about 1,000 utterances. When conversational partners were speaking with people with ASD, they had about 1,500 utterances. And when conversational partners were speaking to people with typical development, they had 872 utterances. Our two undergraduate students, along with a third undergraduate student, carried out linguistic annotation of each utterance. Specifically, they rated each utterance for politeness, uncertainty, and informativeness on a categorical ordinal 1 to 3 scale. And we achieved pretty reasonable reliability for most of these features. Below, we have some example sentences and their ratings. And you can see something like, "Can you describe where you're at?" has a very high uncertainty rating. "Yeah, it's by some trees" has a very low uncertainty rating because it's very certain. You can see that, okay, so we're going to have to go down 1 block is polite because instead of giving an order, they're sort of making a request. And you can see it's near the irrigation pond has a high level of information content. And what we found was that experimental participants with ASD were significantly more polite and less informative on average than experimental participants with typical development. But we also found that conversational partners exhibited more uncertainty when speaking to ASD participants. And we also found that greater uncertainty in dialogue appears to correspond to a longer time to complete a task. So the more uncertain the conversational partner was, the longer it took for the task to complete. This is not surprising, but it was not something that we had empirically demonstrated before. We also found that greater informativeness in the dialogue appears to correspond to a shorter time of task completion. These correlations are very close to being, the first is not quite significant. The second is actually achieves significance with p less than 0.05. So we find that adults with ASD exhibit observable pragmatic patterns, which are significantly different in some cases from typical developing peers. And what's interesting is that these patterns seem to influence the pragmatic expression of the conversational partners, as well as certain measures of task success, specifically how long it took to complete the task. Although these are in no way definitive and our groups are very small here, we are shedding some light on how pragmatics might differ in participants with ASD when they are carrying out this kind of task where they have to sort of instruct someone to do something. And the idea behind this work is not make computer scientists try to sort of come up with ways of diagnosing ASD. That wouldn't be the purpose of this at all. Rather, this would be to sort of help people with adults with ASD to on the one hand, for them to sort of be aware of some of the conversational choices they're making and how those might impact others, but also perhaps we can use this information to help people who work with individuals with autism to adjust their speaking styles and to be aware of the speaking styles of the people that they work with in order to improve communication. This work was supported by the NIDCD, and we thank very much our participants and their families for engaging with our research.